Nixon bought 2 houses on Key Biscayne because he didn't want to fly all the way to California for his California White House. He wanted one closer where it was warm and he could rest and relax, he and the First Lady. And so he bought 2 houses, one for the Secret Service and one for himself. But there wasn't enough room to land a helicopter on the lawn. So he built a platform out over the ocean about 200 yards off the coast for helicopters to land on, and then they had little boats running people back and forth to the helicopters. I'm in the residence. The secretary had a residence, a cabana, you call it, between the putting green and the golf, and there's two cabanas. The owner of the hotel, Mr. Mackle's daughter, was kidnapped, and they buried her in the ground in a coffin, 6 feet underground, with a light and water and something to read and a fan running. The FBI put the entire FBI on and they cracked the case in 2 days, found her, dug her up, got the guys. Mackle, the owner of the hotel, was so happy. J. Edgar Hoover himself flew down, and Mackle thanked him for what the FBI did to save his daughter. Well, he was staying in a cabana just opposite the secretary's. It was late afternoon and the phone rang, and it was the president. He says, "Lou, the president's coming over for a little visit." He says, "I want you to handle the liquor." I said, "Yes, sir." What did he drink? Scotch. So I called the maitre d' of the hotel and I said, "I want silver service, crystal glasses, ice, and cashew nuts and silver trays because the president's coming to visit the secretary." And I was the bartender. So we had, mostly Scotch, single malt Scotch, Chivas Regal, I think it was. And Nixon came, and first of all, I saw the red lights flashing, and the Secret Service surrounded the cabana, and the president comes walking in, and he had the Secretary of Defense with him, and his chief of protocol, Andrew Biddle Duke, and of course the president and the secretary, and they started talking about bombing in Vietnam, and and I'm standing there, "What would you like?" And I'd serve them on a little tray with their drink and with a napkin, and they had cloth napkins, not paper, like linen little napkins for your drink. Talked and drank and talked and drank, and I think I did a pretty good job. Nobody was complaining. And then the president says, "I understand Mr. Hoover's staying right next door." And the secretary said, "Yes, he is. Secretary Rogers was Attorney General of the United States during the Eisenhower administration, so he had a personal friendship with Hoover." Secretary Rogers and Hoover were buddies when Secretary was Attorney General during the Eisenhower years. So Nixon says, "Well, let's go visit him." So everybody gets up, puts their glasses down, goes down the steps, walks across the putting green, and there's a light on in the upstairs room where Hoover is staying with Tolson, his number 2 man. And I pulled open the screen door and I held it with my foot, and Nixon knocked on the door. And nothing happened, and we're all waiting. Nixon knocked on the door a second time. Nobody came to the door, and nobody answered. And Nixon says, "Well, I guess he must be sleeping. Why don't we call it a night?" So that was the end of it. I closed the screen door and everybody left. Well, Hoover was there. Whether or not he knew it was Nixon, I don't know, but he never answered the door. The next day, the secretary says to me, "Lou, I understand Mr. Hoover's going back to Washington tomorrow. Would you invite him to join us on my Jetstar? He and Mr. Tolson are most welcome." I said, "Yes, sir." As the secretary waited, he says, "I'll wait till you get..." So I clutched over there, and here's Hoover, sound asleep on a chase lounge with his big belly up, and he's got a hat on and sunglasses, and he's snoring. And I was scared. I'm afraid whoever woke up J. Edgar Hoover. So I walked around and around a couple, trying to decide what I should do. And so I decided to cough, and I went, and it woke him up. And he pulled his sunglasses down. He says, "Yes, young man?" I said, "Mr. Hoover," I said, "Secretary of State Rogers extends his compliments and would like to invite you and Mr. Tolson to join him on a Jetstar for a return trip to Washington tomorrow." And he paused a minute. He says, "Well, thank Mr. Rogers for the very gracious invitation, but Mr. Tolson and I have reservations on Southwest Airlines, and we'll stick with that. And there was no FBI agents around. So Hoover didn't want to land at Andrews when the Secretary of State's plane and all the press being there and saying, what's going on? What spy event is happening? What's Hoover and the Secretary of State doing together on a plane? So he didn't accept the invitation. That morning, the last morning, I was having breakfast. The Secretary was in his cabana. I looked up, and here comes Hoover in a Hawaiian shirt with the New York Times under his arm, and Tolson, and they're walking up the path from the cabanas at the beach to the poolside table where we're having breakfast. And he goes over and he sits down one table over from us. He didn't even look at us. He had no agents with him. He and Tolson were alone. The maitre d' come over and they ordered breakfast. And we're sitting there finishing up our coffee because we'd been there a while. And then it was time to pay the bill, and the maitre d' come over and he said, I said, how much do we owe you? And he says, no, Mr. Mackel extends his compliments, and FBI agents carte blanche at the hotel. You don't have to pay anything. Mr. Mackel is so grateful that you got his daughter. And Hoover turned and he looked, and I said, thank Mr. Mackel for his kind consideration, but I am not an FBI agent. And Hoover was looking right at me. And I said, we are not FBI agents. We will pay our bill. And so Hoover put his glasses and he turned back around and finished eating. But I said, that son of a gun is watching to see if I'd get a free breakfast saying we're FBI agents. And we didn't do it, of course, but the opportunity was there. Anyway, the story goes on. The phone rings again. The next day, and it's the president, and he says, Bibi Rebozo has invited us to go out to his island out off the Bahamas. He's building a house, and we're going to have a barbecue on the beach. And he invites the secretary to go along. So the secretary hangs up the phone. He says, Lou, he says, get ready. We're going over to fly out to an island that Bibi Rebozo has a house on. He says, and just then the door knocked, and it's the CIA courier with the afternoon traffic in a briefcase. He unhooks it and gives it to me. It's the old man's reading for the afternoon, all top secret stuff on Vietnam. And I took the briefcase and signed for it. And the secretary says, Lou, get my bathing suit because we're going to maybe go swimming after the barbecue. So I'm looking all over there. You think I could find his bathing suit? He's in the bedroom, and he finally comes out. He says, you ready to go? I said, Mr. Secretary, I'm sorry, I can't find your bathing suit. He says, it's on the railing. So I opened the door on the railing, and there was his bathing suit in the sun drying. And I grabbed it, and I had this top secret briefcase. So I opened it up and put the bathing suit in the briefcase, closed it up, and said, let's go. And we went, motorcaded over, of course, to the Nixon residence, and the chopper was ready. And I had the briefcase, and I didn't know what the heck to do with it. All I knew was I couldn't leave it anywhere. I went up to the captain, who's the commanding officer of Marine One. I said, the secretary's going with the president. I have to be with him. He says, what's your name? I said, Diener. He looks at me, he says, you're not on the manifest. You can't go. I says, I have to go. I have to be with the secretary. He says, you're not on the manifest. You're not going. I says, is there going to be a number 2? He said, yeah. He says, you can get on that. The secretary and the president got on number 1. Chopper 2 come down. We boated out. I still had the briefcase. I told the captain, I said, I'm supposed to be with the secretary. He says, yeah, get on. So I got on, and we're flying out over the ocean, and the 2 helicopters are going along, and then they go like this. They parted ways. And I said, whoa, where are you going? Aren't we going to go? He says, no, we're going to land on another island. It's a private visit. He said, they don't want all the noise of another helicopter. We're going to land on this island and wait. I said, I got to be over there. He says, no, you don't. So he landed on an island, and they all got out, the crew, and got into their bathing suits and went swimming. And I'm sitting there with a briefcase between my knees on a log with a suit on. And I said, I have to be on that. He says, we have nothing on that. So he flips on the external loudspeaker and they're in the water swimming and having a blast. And all of a sudden the speaker on the helicopter says, code name to the captain. And he jumps out of the water and runs up and he says, and he's talking on the thing, and he turned around and he looked at me and says, are you Agent Diener? I said, yes, sir. He says, get in. So I climbed on the helicopter and it took off and flew to the island. And I thought, well, I get to see the barbecue and all this stuff and the new house. And, well, they sent a golf cart out to meet the helicopter and took the briefcase and the bathing suit, and it was gone. They didn't let me stay, and I couldn't insist on staying. So I got on the chopper and went back to the island. It must have cost the taxpayers $10,000 in fuel to fly me back and forth with the bathing suit. But that's what happened. That's the honest-to-gosh truth. Secretary Rogers. He was a real gentleman, he really was. And he treated us very nicely. He'd always asked, did we eat, and when he was eating, and he was very considerate. One time a button fell off of one of the, I don't know who it was. His wife sewed it back on, Adele. Her foot was in a cast. She had broken her leg, and it was so difficult to travel with the secretary and his wife, and she had to be in a wheelchair with her foot sticking way out on an airplane and on a helicopter. But everybody came and signed it, her cast, and she was very happy, and that's how it finally ended.
This has been a DS Public Affairs Oral History with former Special Agent Lou Diener.